That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and we're going to be talking about the most important election of our lifetimes. Now, I'm sure we've all heard that phrase a time or two. However, this time, it actually might be one of the most important. And it's not because, it's, finally the Democrats are going to have control or finally the Republicans are going to have control. It's because there is such a clear choice in directions that we are being led. And I wish I could tell you it was as simple as it's, the Democrats are going to take us one direction, Republicans are going to take us another. In the broadest sense, some people might make that connection, but really it's the choice between statism and the rights of the individual. And you will find that there are some Republicans who are statist through and through, and there are others that are, on the side of personal liberty. Just like you will find occasionally Democrats, like Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, who left the Democratic Party because she was more serious about freedom than she was about maintaining her political privilege by being part of that organization. So I want to start with a couple of things, starting with what to expect on election night. These are our talking points from the Associated Press, courtesy of the idahopress.com, telling us what we need to expect on election night. And I want you to pay close attention to some of the little subtle examples of bias that creep in here. So Republicans so deeply dominate Idaho that the headlines tell us that election day can be anticlimactic to the Republican primary in May. I don't know if that's necessarily, a reason to, just sit this one out. The Republicans have got it, but there seems to be almost a little bit of a sense of resignation, but it's not a sense of hopelessness, which you might expect from Democrats. If the Republicans really have charge, this means that it's going to thwart all of our plans. Idaho Democrats know better. Why? Because there are plenty of Republicans who are Republicans in name only. And that's, they might as well be Democrats for the policies and the statism that they support. So the article talks about how Republicans so deeply dominate conservative Idaho that election day can be anticlimactic to the GOP primary in May, where most races in the past several decades have been decided. Republicans are looking to continue their dominance by retaining all statewide elected offices, a U.S. Senate seat, both of the state's U.S. House seats, and supermajorities in the state House and Senate. I mean, it sounds like they've got it wrapped up pretty good. Does that mean you're free? Not necessarily. In fact, if anything, it means you need to be very careful because Republicans will take your freedoms and tax your money away from you with a smile and the assurance, I'm for small government too. They're not, their Democratic counterparts are sending the car over the cliff with the pedal to the metal. The Republicans are driving thoughtfully at the posted speed limit as they take the car over the cliff. So the article then goes on to talk about Governor Brad Little, and it describes him as a rancher with a long career in Idaho politics, overcame possibly his toughest challenge for a second term in May by crushing Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin in the primary, despite her endorsement from former President Donald Trump. Now, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Stephen Hyde has been running a notably low-key campaign. Gee, I wonder why. It's because really, what's he going to do? It's a Republican-dominated state. All he has to do is stay off the radar screen and, a couple helpful nudges from his media buddies. But listen to them describe a third gubernatorial candidate, Ammon Bundy. Anti-government activist Ammon Bundy, which I believe they now think is his legal name, running as an independent, is well known for participating in armed standoffs with law enforcement. At the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon in 2016, which left one man dead, and on federal land near his family's ranch in Nevada in 2014. It's astonishing to me that you could get so much wrong in the space of one paragraph. Oh, but here you are, AP, or at least Idaho Press. I don't know. It's, this is the caricature, and this is kind of a consensus that the news media in Idaho has decided on for Ammon Bundy. Well, we can't tell you anything about what he stands for, but you know what? He's anti-government. Now, a lot of people have been turning up to his events. I don't know if it's enough to put him over the top, but I guarantee if Ammon, for some reason, were to win the gubernatorial race and become Idaho's governor, you would hear more election deniers than you could possibly imagine. And it would all be on the side of the press, a number of Republicans, and of course, all the Democrats in the state. So I've talked about the so-called standoffs. There was no standoff in Malheur. The only man who was killed was Lavoy Finicum, killed by frightened police officers who had no arrest warrant for him, and a very planned military-style L-shaped ambush. Kind of makes you wonder if people are being on the up and up there. But hey, all you need to know is he's dangerous and he is an anti-government activist. And, in the meantime, Governor Little, they're not exactly enthusiastic about him, but at least he's not Ammon Bundy. I wonder why they didn't just say that, since that's really what seems to be their point. U.S. Senator Mike Crapo and his fellow incumbent Republicans in Idaho's 2 U.S. House seats don't face robust challenges. Voters are also choosing an attorney general and deciding on a proposed amendment to the state constitution that would allow the part-time legislature, which typically meets for 3 to 4 months a year, to call itself back into session. Currently, only the governor can call a special session. So I know that this is like, well, we don't want a full-time legislature, do we? Do you realize, though, that I don't think the legislators themselves want a full-time legislative job, which is why they only do that short 3 to 4 month period, take care of business, and then go back home and go back to their regular lives. But the governor may call the legislative session call the legislature into session, rather, but it's the legislature who ultimately chooses to adjourn. So if they wanted to, they could just decide to stay on year-round. They could all find some place to live there in Boise and become a year-round legislature. Why is it important that we have this option? Because Idaho's governor, at least Brad Little, showed that he was willing to bend his ethics and bend the laws and assume powers that were never his in the first place in order to garner $19 billion worth of federal COVID relief money. So, I mean, look, if the governor doesn't want interference, from a lawmaking body, a deliberative body, yeah, he definitely wants to be the one to say whether or not they can be called into session. I think this may be something that Idaho voters would want to consider. Do you want that kind of authority solely in the hands of the executive branch of government? Or would you like to see that power in the hands of the branch that's most accountable to the people? Every 2 years, you elect people as representatives. So something to think about, but I understand there could be many opinions on this, but just understand, this is not about the legislators wanting to become full-time, politicians. It's about reining in the governor's power, the executive power that has been abused. So that's one thing to consider, at least on that issue. Now, how Idaho votes. They talk about how Idaho has historically voted mostly in person on election day, maybe 20 to 30% of the vote coming from people voting early. And between 3 counties, Ada, Kootenai, and Canyon, you're going to find roughly 50% or over half of the statewide vote. Republicans have a registration advantage in every county statewide. There are nearly 5 times more registered Republicans than Democrats. So here's how the election will be covered by the Associated Press. AP will tabulate and declare winners in 67 contested races in Idaho, including 10 statewide races and 2 U.S. House races. Now, the AP doesn't make projections, and they'll only declare a winner when it's determined there is no scenario that would allow the trailing candidate to close the gap. Should a candidate declare victory or offer a concession before the AP calls a race, they will cover newsworthy developments in their reporting, but in doing so, they'll also make it clear that AP hasn't declared a winner and explain why. Okay, good on them. The AP may call a statewide or U.S. House race in which the margin between the top 2 candidates is 0.5% or less, if we determine the lead is too large for a potential recount to change the outcome. So what did we learn from the primary? Okay, let's do a little politicking here, AP. Voters in the deeply conservative state sent mixed signals in the primary, rejecting what they call a far-right candidate. That's what the AP calls a far-right candidate, in challenging Little, and ousting the longtime Republican Attorney General in favor of a candidate who indicated he will run the office in a more partisan manner. I don't think that's exactly what Raul Labrador has said he's running on, but what Raul Labrador, first of all, why did the voters turn out Lawrence Wasden, the incumbent Attorney General, and then give their vote to Raul Labrador in the GOP primary? It's because Wasden has pretty much become a rubber stamp guy. Oh, I only call the balls and strikes as I see them. But more often than not, he's simply enabling the will of the state. Now, as an elected official, and this is what I'm hearing from Raul Labrador, he takes very seriously the fact that he is representing not just the state, but he is representing the people of Idaho. After all, they are the ones who put him, or who could put him, in office. And his priority, at least as he's explained it, seems to be to keep people free. Do you know that's the proper role of government? But that's what the AP refers to as running the office in a more partisan manner, meaning providing friction against the statism that would really like to be let off its leash and just to do whatever it can without all these pesky people, voters, and others getting in its way. So what's changed since the pandemic election of 2020? Well, spurred by what they call bogus claims of widespread fraud, Idaho has added a post-election audit of ballots chosen randomly from precincts in 8 counties. Idaho lawmakers unanimously established the audit this year as part of a new law whose backers said it was intended to increase public confidence in election results. Okay, stop there for just a second. You don't have to believe that the 2020 election was stolen to credibly have doubts about whether or not there was manipulation or there was some kind of tweaking of the results that otherwise affected the outcome. That's not the same thing as saying, oh, yeah, for sure it was stolen. There were inconsistencies. There were no real court cases, with the exception of one in Pennsylvania, which actually was found that, there were some definite problems in the way that these mail-in ballots were handled, or in the way that state law was changed to accommodate mail-in ballots. So to increase public confidence in election results, I would think that the AP and others would want to see that. But see, they're worried about election deniers, and that's why they go on here to talk about the law was passed after MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell made unsubstantiated claims. Unsubstantiated according to whom? Well, we said so. We're the AP. Why, don't you know? And floated conspiracy theories about the 2020 presidential election in multiple states for the purpose of undermining voter confidence. Is that what he was doing, or was he trying to call attention to inconsistencies and to examples of where there was smoke? Should we maybe check this out and see if there's fire? Well, obviously the AP doesn't buy into that, but this extended to Idaho, even though Trump won the deeply conservative state with nearly 64% of the vote. Now, the good news is they did do that random checking of ballots, that audit, after the primary this year. I think it was 20,000 ballots, and found no real inconsistencies. That's good. Now, would you be that open about the 2020 election? Oh, we don't have to. That obviously never went anywhere. You know, the Supreme Court kicked it down the road. It's not that they heard the case and said on its merits, oh, yeah, we can't agree with this. They didn't want to touch it. Many other courts didn't want to touch it. I don't know. Maybe it was all the riots that were going on through the summer of 2020. Maybe people were a little bit scared about the very visible, but mostly fiery, but mostly peaceful left-wing violence that we saw through most of 2020. Maybe that's why they weren't so eager to, tip that kettle over. But nonetheless, to pretend that this was all decided and everything is just conspiracy theories and unfounded bogus claims, no, it's never been given a real serious, thorough going over. So if people have doubts, if people's confidence in the election system is waning, it's for good reason. It's not just a figment of their imaginations, and it's not just because, oh, our candidate didn't win. Somebody was manipulating things long before that election, and I find it really hard to believe that they just stopped because, well, we do have to be above board on this. I look at all the people who were working overtime to try to get Trump out of office and tried to impeach him and impeached him multiple times, and they're still going after him. Yeah, these people were not playing honestly. They were not playing above board. Why should we trust them now? Well, because the AP says so. Sorry, going to need something a little bit better than that. So how long does voting usually take, or the counting of those votes take? Results are usually available Tuesday evening, but in some counties, that can stretch into the following day. So while Idaho doesn't count absentee ballots before polls close, it does process them beforehand. And this helps the state wrap up voting quickly. In 2020, Idaho counted about half the vote within an hour of the polls closing, but it took 7 hours to report 100% of the vote. So there you have it. There's how the AP describes, the voting is going to take place. Oh, there was one more thing. I'm sorry. I need to share this with you. What happens after Tuesday? Well, there's no mandatory recount law in Idaho, but candidates might request a recount. A candidate can request a recount no matter the size of the vote margin, but a margin of less than or equal to 0.1% of the total vote or 5 total votes allows for a free recount paid for by the state. Now, if the margin is larger than 0.1%, then the candidate who requests the recount has to pay for it. To start a recount, the candidate must request it within 20 days of the canvass. So there you have it. That's pretty timely, and I think that's actually probably a good thing. Now, if there is a single theme that has been nationwide throughout the entire midterm election season, it has to be This is dangerous to our democracy. I mean, the president was speaking on this last night. It's the refrain that we've heard over and over. And I just want to illustrate for you, it's a talking point. Why do I say it's a talking point and not legitimate news? Well, watch this and you'll understand why.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about the trouble and irresponsible, one-sided news stories
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Interesting. I was picking up on a vibe where it almost feels like they were trying to promote the idea that this is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Unapproved information, what they call misinformation. But my point is simply this. Many of these media groups, particularly the legacy media, they're owned by mass corporations. They receive similar talking points, and that has been the drum that they've been beating over and over again. Now, in Idaho, there's a little variation on this. There's a little bit of a chorus of extremism. Here we go. Yes. Oh, and there are the usual suspects right there. Coalition speaks out against political extremism in Idaho. And this has to do with the Defend and Protect Idaho members encouraging Idahoans to thoroughly research candidates before voting in Tuesday's general election. Now, I think that's actually a great idea. I think you should research the candidates and research the issues before you vote. But I'm not sure that that's exactly what they mean. And let's dive into the story to learn why. Respect, something former Ada County Sheriff Gary Rainey believes today's political climate lacks. Gee, you think so? You think calling everybody far right and extremist, that's a promoting of respect or what? I don't know. Let's get back to respecting each other, Rainey said. Last winter, Rainey started Defend and Protect Idaho, a political action committee to combat political extremism in Idaho. Voter intimidation and violent protests are just a couple of examples. Where has that happened? I mean, you invoke it, but Rainey, where? Show me where. And if you say, well, they had Proud Boys, trying to show up to the children's drag show up there in Coeur d'Alene. Sorry, that wasn't voter intimidation or political violence, and frankly, no violence occurred. Well, it might have, yes. And if the King of England were plumbed differently, he might be the Queen. Let's deal with what's actually happening in reality. He said they formed the coalition to give a voice to those who do not condone lawlessness and threatening behaviors. Do you know anybody who openly condones that? I know some who do, but they do it under the guise of whatever the state does is perfectly okay. The state and lawlessness on the part of the state, for instance, arresting pro-life activists, for praying outside of abortion clinics. Yeah, that's pretty violent. That's threatening behavior. But hey, this apparently only works one way. Now, the coalition is made up of law enforcement, military, faith leaders, farmers, ranchers, small business owners. Do you realize, of course, that the people who are against extremism here also look an awful lot like the people who news stories like this would portray as being for extremism, because they're for personal freedom. They're for limited government. They're for lower government spending. They're for more accountability among their elected officials. Tom Schuler, military veteran and former Boise police officer, says, we're extremely lucky to live in Idaho, but protecting democracy takes work. We're going to hear that word democracy quite a bit here. There's a lot of hidden potential extremism out there. Schuler said. Okay, it's not out in the open, but it's hidden. It's potential. So again, we're dealing with things that still, for the most part, exist in Mr. Schuler's mind, but the potential's out there. Folks who, could potentially be allied with extremism and violence that we don't want to see happen here. Okay, it would be much more of a strong stance if you could actually show an example where that's happened, but you can't. So this is playing on people's fears and trying to plant that seed of, well, but it could happen. Extremists are a very small percentage of the population whose primary goal is to intimidate people, Rainey said, and he wants to encourage everyday Idahoans to speak up against extremist groups. Okay, how do they know who the extremist groups are? Oh, the media will tell us. Yes, I'm sure they will. Yeah, and they've got quite a track record too, don't they? By the way, speaking of extremist groups, well, actually, I'll save the video for just a moment, but you want to see what real extremism looks like? People are calling it out, and they are speaking up against these groups. Okay, actually, I'll do it. This is a political ad that is running across the U.S. as part of this election year. Now, this is not to tell you have to vote Republican, but one of the reasons they're encouraging people to vote Republican is because of what extremists from the other party are promoting to children. Check it out.
It really never occurred to you to put something into your not even a so you've never yourself? As a teen, I got bored of I then dreamed about having a massive that lasted all day. Do you feel sad that you weren't born with a
These are exact excerpts from the book Genderqueer. This book is being taught to public school children. America, we have a problem. On November 8th, vote to stop the sexualization of your kids. Vote Republican.
Okay, now again, I'm not saying you should vote Republican and that's going to solve all the problems, but there's a clear difference. Republican candidates, for the most part, aren't standing up for that kind of filth being promoted to kids. And by the way, if you have a look on your face as you heard that excerpts of what they were reading there and you're like, whoa, what the actual heck is going on here? Guess what? You're an extremist. You must want to ban books. You must be a book burner, some kind of a censor, as opposed to simply a responsible parent, grandparent, citizen who really wants to take a second look about it. We're making this available to kids in our school libraries or in our public libraries. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why people are very motivated, at least a number of people are motivated to go to the polls. And I think, I'm not going to say for Idaho, because I think Idaho's already a pretty conservative state, but in other areas, if you see pushback, this is where it's going to come from. And I mean pushback at the polls. If people are shown the door, it's because they've been promoting crap like this and saying, oh, it's okay, it's perfectly normal, perfectly good to teach this to kids. We know it's not. Now, Rainey says the reason people move here is because of quality of life. That means they don't tolerate this extremism, the threats, the behaviors where people feel intimidated and don't feel they can speak out. Oh, you mean like if a parent wants to say, I don't want my kid being taught that stuff. Come on, let's be consistent here. Rainey says it's fairly easy to figure out who the candidates with extreme beliefs are and that Idahoans should vote for politicians who are willing to sit down and listen. Sit down, listen, or sit down, shut up and listen. I mean, I'm just trying to flesh this out a bit. It's not about which political party people support, he said. It's about supporting politicians who represent diverse views and lift others up. Because at the end of the day, simple respect goes a long way. That's how our system of government was built, was that debate, that discourse that happens respectfully in our legislatures and in our communities, Rainey said. Support those people, respect others, be tolerant, and be willing to listen. Now, if he's really appealing to how our system of government was built, then he really probably should be a little bit consistent and understand that the founding generation, the founding fathers, never used the word democracy to describe the system that they gave us. They didn't believe in democracy. What they believed in was a representative republic, a constitutional republic, or even the states have constitutions, as well as the federal government, that require them to follow the law just as the citizens are expected to follow the law. Tell me, do you see lawlessness on the part of governments at any level? I mean, if you can't see it, or if you are willing to justify it, well, first of all, that may tell me just a little bit about where you're getting your news information from. But if you want to learn the principles and practices of liberty, well, by all means, learn them. But understand, when you really learn what they are, learn the ideas and the influences, why is there separation of powers in governments? Why are there checks and balances? Why is government limited in the first place? And what's the purpose that it's even called into existence in the first place? you'll quickly become aware that, wow, we've got a lot of government that's exceeding what it should be doing. And that's kind of the point. But you have to be willing to study it on your own. Now, I'm going to try to make the case here that, yes, it's important to vote. But I also want to make the case that voting alone can't induce change. And that's true even when we carefully cast our vote only for good, wise, and honest candidates. In fact, what you do before and after the election actually has great impact. So if you want to make your influence felt, yes, showing up and voting as an informed voter would probably be a good idea, but it's not going to end there. That's not the high sacrament of our civic religion. It's just one aspect of what we need to do. Here are 4 suggestions that we can do to use our influence as wisely as possible wherever we happen to be. The first one is found in how we develop our personal character. Truly good people tend to become a source of illumination to the people around them through quiet service to others. They don't need a bandwagon. They don't need, a big political production for people to recognize that's a good person. And those good people inspire confidence. And it's telling. The times that we live in are such that it's a truly revolutionary act to simply be a truly good person. And yes, people will look at you funny. Well, what are you all about? Why won't you chant with us? Why aren't you waving the flag? Sometimes being a good person means doing exactly the opposite of what the masses are doing. Next, we can emancipate ourselves from the chains of ignorance through thoughtful and regular study. Now, that doesn't mean just sit there and binge on media or social media. This means actually learn about the principles and practices and the policies that are at stake. And by the way, don't take politicians' words. They always have weaselly ways of, well, we can spin this in some way that makes it sound perfectly logical. It's sophistry. They can take something untrue and make it sound like, wow, that's not a bad idea. But if you are a person who's willing to study ideas that are above your head, that is how you build your understanding. By the way, the brilliance of the founding generation was obtained exactly in that way. They read old books, they studied what old philosophers, what great minds that came before us had to say. You and I may think, well, they couldn't possibly know as much as we do. I have a smartphone. Trust me, if you've ever read what members of the founding generation have said, or the sources that they read to get their enlightenment, you'll understand these were not dummies. They actually understood things that for a lot of people are above our heads. Third, we can become more involved in civic affairs through regular communication with elected officials at every level. Now, obviously, that's going to be more productive at the municipal or county level. And I get it. It's a draw on your time. None of us has enough time to do everything that we want. But how serious are you about being a positive influence, about claiming, using, and defending your freedoms? See, attending public meetings on a regular basis not only gives you an edge in understanding what's going on around you, but there's also real power when your elected officials know you by name. You walk into the room and they're like, oh, heads up, so-and-so is here. And then they know you by your principles. But you do have to be persistent. One final thought. We can make our influence felt by sharing our counsel on the issues affecting us. And this can be done in any number of ways. You can do it by vote, you can do it by letter, you can do it by speaking, teaching, or informing the people around us. And it doesn't mean forcing them. Okay, this is not there's a row of milk bottles and I'm going to use this fire hose to fill them all up. All that does is gets water everywhere and knocks the bottles around. Maybe you get a little water inside one of them or not. It's done best at the individual level. And you'll know you're doing it right when people start to regularly seek you out for your advice. That's a sure sign that you're doing it correctly. So just a few thoughts as we head into the election. We're going to have a lot more to talk about next week here on Nowhere to Hide. I hope that things go well, that your hopes aren't dashed, or that you don't get too giddy from your expectations being realized. But more than anything, I hope that we see a return to solid reality, good government. See, that's an anti-government. What do you mean good government? It's all good. No, it's not. And the people who know the difference, I hope they make their influence felt on Tuesday. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.